This video is part one of my coverage of Sufism and the Islamic tradition for PSY 230 Personality Theory. This will be our final chapter for the semester. Covering Sufism, for me as a teacher of personality theory, I had no exposure prior to taking courses in transpersonal psychology with anything about the Islamic tradition. Like a lot of Midwestern Americans, my exposure to Islam was largely through the mass media and was not particularly positive, in some cases was outright racist. So my initial responses to it was that it was a tradition that had a lot of commonalities with my own upbringing as a Christian person as a child. There were common themes, common elements, and then as I studied other things like what you've been exposed to in this class, the Hindu tradition and the Buddhist tradition, common threads there as well. So I think you will find that as we travel through this journey to look at how Sufism can explore our understanding of what it means to be human, both in terms of living a good life, but also in terms of how to develop that good life. Oops, hit the wrong button.
Listen to the story told by the reed of being separated. Since I was cut from the reed bed, I have made this crying sound. Anyone apart from someone he loves understands what I say. Anyone pulled from a source longs to go back. All is the beloved, and the lover is a veil. The beloved is alive, and the lover is dead. From Rumi's Matnavi.
Sufis have no country, and they do not live in any single geographic region. They exist throughout the Islamic world as both Shia and Sunni. Sufis represent the spiritual or mystical dimension of Islam. Sufism is known as the way of the heart, the way of the pure. It is the path that takes the seeker to the divine presence. The first historical traces of Sufism go back to the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He was a profound mystic, and it is said that he taught his son-in-law, Hazrat Ali, the techniques and inner truths of this mysticism. Thus, almost all Sufi schools represent Prophet Muhammad and Hazrat Ali as a door to spiritualism. The earliest known Sufis were solitary mystics who attracted followers on the strength of their personal piety. These illumined beings taught their students the techniques they had used to become friends of God. Those students who attained spiritual realization in turn taught others. By the 9th century, what had originally been informal teacher-student relationships formalized with the founding of tariqas, or orders, each originating from a different Sufi saint. Unity is a core principle of Islam, which refers to the monotheistic oneness of God, or the intimate relationship between God and creation at all levels. However, for the Sufi, unity, or Tawheed in Arabic, is a fundamental mystical experience of reality. This means we arise from God and return to God, and this truth can be experienced and known. Therefore, Sufis search for their inner soul to communicate with the divine. As Rumi says,
A soul which is not clothed with the inner garment of love should be ashamed of its existence. Be drunk with love, for love is all that exists. Where is intimacy found, if not in the give and take of love? If they ask what love is, say, the sacrifice of will. If you have not left your will behind, you have no will at all.
Sufis often use music as a source to connect with God. Although musical expression in Islam is often seen as debatable, Sufi musical performances have played an important role in creative literature and poetry, as well as in spreading the message of Islam throughout the world. Sufi practices, including chanting, singing, dance, and meditation, are all intended to lead followers toward the experience of annihilation or fana of the ego in God. Sufism teaches that the ideal state of realization is in subsistence, or baka, wherein the mystic is conscious of both this unity and of his own individual identity. The Sufi's quest is to experience God within oneself. This is often called marifa. What is most essential to Sufism cannot be learned, but can only be reached by personal experience and inward transformation.
Ibn Arabi says, "When my beloved appears, with what eye do I see him? With his eye, not with mine. For none sees him except himself. My heart is capable of every form. A cloister for the monk, a temple for idols, a pasture for gazelles, the votaries Kaaba, the tables of the Torah, the Quran. Love is the creed I hold. Wherever turn his camel, love is still my creed and faith."
This famous saying about music in the Indian subcontinent says that music is the feast of the soul. It depends on each person's inner feelings how the power of music is experienced. According to Sufi Ruzbihan Bakli, a poet, musician, and commentator of the Quran,
spiritual music is the key to the treasury of the divine verities. The Gnostics are divided. Some listen with the help of the stations, maqamat. Some with the help of the states, halam. Some with the help of spiritual unveiling, mukashifat. Some with the help of vision, mushahidat. When they listen according to the stations, they are in reproach. When they listen according to spiritual unveiling, they are in union, wisal. When they listen according to vision, they are immersed in the divine beauty.
So that should give you a useful kind of grounding in basic ideas connected to Sufism. It helped me to get my kind of bearings as I was first learning about Sufism in graduate school in the context of a reading group that I had joined that was run by the personality psychologist in my graduate program. We were focused mostly on the poetry that is connected to Sufism, people like Rumi, who became popular in Western circles largely through misinterpretation. A lot of people who read Rumi see it as romance poetry, when it was actually very deeply spiritual. Discussions of love largely with the divine as opposed to another person, although, poetry is in the eye of the reader. So to start, as we explore how do we apply this study of personality theory to the Sufi tradition, you have to start with the idea that Sufis really are very much transpersonal in their approach. So if you go back to Maslow and Maslow's arguments and suggestions, if you go to Jung and his arguments and suggestions, there are some through lines that connect. For Carl Jung in particular, he was influenced in part by Buddhism and Sufism and Hinduism in his descriptions of the collective unconscious. So we need to start with this assumption that there is in Sufism an exploration of all of human experience. And a critical feature of that is using human experience in order to connect with the divine. People, it is argued, are driven toward growth. That's a commonality with our humanistic psychologists, people like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, that we're driven to be more than what we are. particularly for Abraham Maslow, the idea of self-actualization at the top of the pyramid it is consistent with this idea that we are driven to evolve. We are driven to go beyond mere survival. Sufis also, there's a strong theme within the Sufi tradition of purity and cleansing, not necessarily in a literal sense, although that does show up in the traditions that variously come under this heading, but more metaphorically, trying to seek perfection in the way one lives one's life. The assertion is that there are people who can be mentors, people who have achieved some wisdom, some knowledge in the practice, and they can provide that wisdom to others. Note that that is a consistency that we saw in the Hindu tradition and in the Buddhist tradition, that there are teachers, that there are the wise who understand the way and can basically coach you up and bring you forward. Now, as with the last two chapters, I'm going to apologize in advance for my lack of knowledge of appropriate pronunciation. Arsta and Sheikh are described as the principles of Sufism, or have described the principles of Sufism. And again, be on the lookout for through lines with some of our other theories, particularly the last couple that we've looked at, but also throughout the course. You start with the principle that there are many ways to find a relationship with the divine, or to reach some, whatever the definition of truth is, to get that. All of them involve, in the Sufi tradition, a transcendence of the ego. That is a commonality with Buddhism and Hindu traditions, where you have this goal of going beyond the mere ego existence. And doing so, the purpose of transcending the ego is to be in service of the holy, of the divine. There's an assumption that human beings in their ideal state, are going to live in harmony and in connection and in love, and be deeply attached to justice and fairness and a whole variety of principles of how people should conduct themselves with others. The assumption is you can't do that. You can't live in harmony until your ego has been basically quashed. So the ego is described as being selfish and arrogant, and that has to be transcended before people can live in harmony. So if you think about, why is there disruption? Why are people angry? Why is there hate? It's because of attachment, over-attachment to the ego. Love is assumed to be the centerpiece of existence, and also the grounding point for moral functioning. When people are functioning in a state of love, and the principle of love is used to organize people's thinking, to organize their daily activities, then that becomes the grounding for all of their moral decision making. And finally, the essential truth, the essential goal is self-awareness. And that self-awareness transforms into the relationship with the divine, or the knowledge of God. Practicing in Sufi, as your authors describe it, occurs in 4 stages. And, as an American, these terms like Sharia are often misdefined and used in ways that are often racist. I don't think there's any other way to say it. A lot of Americans, their only experience with the word Sharia is in the phrase Sharia law, and the kind of misuse of Islam as a way to control and treat people badly. That's not the use of Sharia that your authors are using here. Sharia is a set of teachings about morality and ethics. And there are teachings about morality and ethics in every single religious tradition. There is, what you should and should not do as a good human being. So the Sharia simply refers to how people are to practice their religion as a part of being Sufi. Tariqa, and I'm not sure that I'm pronouncing that properly, is described as a path with no tracks, where the seeker follows this path from one safe space to another safe space. So if you're thinking about the desert, you have to move from water location to water location in order to survive. So you can use that as a metaphor for the purpose, for what the person who is studying Sufism is practicing. They're moving from oasis to oasis as a part of their inner practice. So they're moving from rest period to rest period and respite period to respite period as the idea of tariqa. Hakika, again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that even remotely properly, refers to developing a deeper inner understanding of both that knowledge of the rules, the Sharia, and the practices, the tariqa. The Hakika practice, which is basically interacting with a mentor, imitating the practices of developing inner meaning, of developing a deeper understanding. So it's like second level practice that goes beyond learning the rules and then practicing the rules and getting some inner knowledge. Now in Hakika, you are expanding that inner understanding, that deeper meaning to the practice. And then Marifa, sometimes called Gnosis, is deep level inner knowing. So you're moving from simply study at stage one to minor practice, learning some basic skills, to understanding what the skills are taking you to, and then in the final stage, deep level transcendence of the ego beyond that inner practice. So to review, Sharia is assumed to get people behaving in a way where they are peaceful, where they are loving, where they are ethical in their everyday lives. So you're talking about lots of people with independent egos, and they're all agreeing that these are the rules that we share for communal living. At the next stage, Sufis are expected to go beyond just mere coexistence based on a set of rules and expectations. Now they are expected to see each other as deeply connected. So owning in a very familial sense the connection to other people, to other beings. So you're putting into practice the rules of Sharia in order to deepen your connection and your responsibility to other people. So there's this deeply communal aspect to it. And then at the stage of Hakika, you have really that drilling down into transcending the ego and moving beyond seeing people as separate, seeing you as separate from me, and then recognizing that those perceptions of separateness are keeping you separate from God. And then finally, full transcendence from the ego is where the person is moving to a place where they have a deep level of communion with the divine. When you say know mine and know yours, what you're talking about is boundaries between living beings. So you and your communal relationship with others, your perception of that ego division And from an American standpoint, we have a tremendous amount of difficulty even imagining what that would be like because we are so hyper individualistic as people. So at that third stage, it's no mine, no yours, it's just we, us. And at the fourth stage, even that is transcended. It's just the divine. And that concludes part 1 of my coverage of Sufism and the Islamic tradition.